to do with who's guiding the campaign.
I also just want to say real quick that negative, I would really sharply draw a distinction between negative and just campaigning and differentiating. Because I understand, and I'm not suggesting, as much as I would have enjoyed it, to, run an ad that eviscerates Warren or, makes a joke about, Biden being senile. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying very clearly and very early on. I mean, he did it a couple of times with Biden, but spend 10 months talking about Social Security, Medicare, and being like, here's the real risk here. And again, I think, in order to do that, you need to get rid of Warren early and so on. But I think not only is Nomiki right, I think that we can't even get into that frame that it's either like we're totally friendly, and unless we're speaking in broad generalities, or we're being like, personal and negative. There's a major middle ground there where most campaigning takes place. And, again, I'll just say, like, I've heard conversations and people who would have a position to know, and this frustrated me across the board very early on, of like every other campaign, including, Warren, obviously, is shopping around like a negative piece. Mm-hmm. Not like a horrible, but just like a, hey, like, what she was doing, like Bernie is incompetent or Bernie's whatever. Right. Everybody's doing that except for Bernie.
That's right.
And I don't hold that against other campaigns. That's what you're supposed to do. But it's magical thinking to think that you yourself, don't also have to do that.
Also, if you want to take on the establishment, I mean, we have to remember here what's on the line. It's not just that you have millions of small dollar donations. People have dug into their pockets and knocked on doors. It's not just that you're representing probably the most meaningful movement in several generations, without a doubt, for progressives. It's not just that you're representing the lives of people. I mean, people who really are dying, right? I mean, literally at this moment, dying because they don't have access to healthcare, or drowning in student loan debt, or other debts, or don't have job opportunities. We know the litany of issues. Bernie is the only option for them. So with that guilt, because I'm Greek and I like to throw out the guilt, you have to keep in mind that it is you to defeat the establishment, that the neoliberal consortium that has suppressed this movement and working people for the last several decades in particular. It's going to require a level of sophistication and ballsiness that you are not comfortable doing. And that's what it means running for president. Some candidates don't like to appear on camera. Some don't like to ask questions. Some don't like to get dressed up or wear makeup or use talking points. But you know what? You got to suck it up, because if you want to win for all these people who are working for you, you got to actually do some of the stuff that makes you feel uncomfortable. And that is the duty of the team around him to say to him.
Okay. Let's bring Jamie on. She's out there. We're breaking format today. We're going to get to some other stories and whatnot. While we're waiting for Jamie, I mean, I think that, we have two sets of sort of analysis here, maybe three. One is sort of, what this campaign could have done differently if there was something they could have done differently in the past. The other is sort of what the campaign accomplished in terms of the sort of the issue set that we all care about. And I guess maybe, like broadly, like how both those things can be applied to the future. I'm not sure that the first, bucket of stuff, when we look back on what they may or may not have done differently, is really applicable, because the next candidate who comes into this situation in the primary, who's going to have these issue sets, are going to have a completely different sort of set of strengths and liabilities as a candidate. And so,
don't you think though, Sam, that there is a broad message here about it? To me, it's almost like the concept of keeping kosher in a certain way. And so it's not like, yes, there has to be, and I really think the Sanders campaign bringing in social movements and helping with labor organizing was so amazing and so positive and will help us for decades to come. But I also think that we need to clearly differentiate in some respects, like labor action, social movement, all profoundly important things, with the very simple concept that if you're running for president, there does need to be an element that just is highly, highly professionalized. And there might just be a broader comment that Nomiki, I think, is pointing to, just like, that element of like, make it really concrete. Jim Clyburn's never going to endorse Bernie Sanders,
right.
But maybe with the right approach, he stays neutral. Maybe. And even if that's a
right.
5%, and even if that's even if that's a 5% chance, we got to take it if we're going to play that game. I think that's the lesson for a candidate that's going to run the insurgency.
I mean, I think that a lot of what they ran on in terms of organizing and using their resources for other things, maybe in terms of the campaign, would be better spent on the campaign. I had a professor in college who, when I was thinking about going to law school, he's a conservative, this guy. And he said, look, don't go to Antioch. I think I was contemplating at the time. I don't think it exists anymore, but it was a lot less. It wasn't a classical legal education, let's put it that way. And he said, go learn how to do the basics. And in the most boring of law schools, so that you can go into court and win.
That's right.
And instead of like, great, critical legal studies, that's great. You can write a nice book. But if you want to actually help your clients, go in, figure out how you win based upon the rules that exist. Then if you have extra time on your, on weekends and nights, you can figure out how to change the system. But Jamie, and I think that's the point you're trying to make, at least in the context of these political campaigns. Jamie, are you there?
Got to unmute.
Can't hear her.
She's got to unmute.
Hello?
You got to turn up your volume on your...
It's me?
Yeah.
Turn it up a little bit?
Yeah, a little more.
Good?
I like your Antifada logo in the background. Did you do that on purpose, or you just have that up?
Oh, no, that's my friends made me that for my birthday last year. It's a big old banner. So I hung it up on the wall, and we're going to use it when we do more live shows.
All right, that's great. So what are your thoughts?
Oh, my God. I have so many thoughts about this. Feeling a lot of feelings. I'll try to keep them not too shoehorny. I don't know. Or maybe you want my perspective as a member of the anti-capitalist left. I think a lot of the analysis that I've read of this election from folks like Eric Levitz was very it threw some cold water on the idea that a left populist challenger could win the Democratic nomination under the present conditions, right? Like, I'm sure that there are things that the Bernie Sanders campaign could have done better. I'm not party to all of the inside baseball, but I think there's a ton of evidence for the fact that it just wasn't possible with Trump as the incumbent. That seems like it was a big factor. And with the present social conditions, with working class institutions at an all-time low, for a lot of these people, the Democratic Party is the only game in town, and they see it, fairly rationally as the last institution standing between them and white supremacist authoritarianism, especially for older voters of color. So that was a very, it was kind of disheartening, but also, it was a realistic view of what's going on. I think if we want to win more going forward, we cannot neglect the importance of these working class institutions. Although I think we really need to be planning in terms of 30, 40 years out, because there are not a lot of signs that the older generation is going to change their behavior before they die, basically, because a lot of the factors and a lot of the experiences that led voters to behave the way they do, they're not changing like they're in the past. You can't go back in time and change the experience of older Black voters in the South growing up under white supremacy and seeing a whole generation of Black radicals get literally murdered for asking too much. It makes total sense that a lot of people wouldn't trust the white voters to vote for anyone to the left of Biden. because it would mean that, social democracy gets instead extended to people of color as well. And it's hard to argue with that given the experiences and given that history.
Let me throw this this question to everyone on the panel that we've assembled today. If let's just stipulate that the idea of organizing versus, and maybe they aren't necessarily in conflict, but you have a limited amount of resources. The idea of organizing versus the sort of idea of like that Michael expressed in terms of Jim Clyburn, like, let's just call it the backslapping. All right. Mm-hmm. That when you're running a presidential campaign, that backslapping might be more important in this context, where you get a couple of key voices, because like you say, Jamie, African Americans, they're, a lot of those people have an experience and a relationship with the Democratic Party that may be different from a lot of other people because of history. But if Jim Clyburn does stay silent in South Carolina and Biden doesn't win by, the amount that he did, maybe the thing is different. Let's just, stipulate that. What about the idea of, in terms of policy sets, where, from my perspective, and I don't, I know there are differing opinions here in terms of like the implications of a Warren's plan to get to Medicare for all and Bernie's plan to get to Medicare for all, but now they are completely equal. They are both completely inoperative and dead. And it was also my opinion that they also were both inoperative and dead as outlined because of what the political realities are going to be one way or another. You could have a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House, but that Democratic Senate is still going to include Chris Coons. It's going to include Mark Kelly if we get it. It's going to be Kristen Sinema. It's going to be Joe Manchin. It's going to be, maybe Hickenlooper or whoever. And some of those people are going to run to the middle and say, like, I'm part of the Gang of Six and we're not going to do this. That's my theory anyways. But be that as it may, what of the idea that type of rigidity in presenting policies, that, doing a two-step legislative plan, which I think probably would have failed, versus a one-step legislative plan, which I also think would have probably failed in that context, that making that the center point of the debate inhibited the ability for the left, broadly speaking, and Sanders, if you will, to win, because that, like the strongest step forward that Sanders had was his lack of details on how we're going to pay for Medicare for all. And maybe there should have been even less details on it and less stridency about this must happen for that was an inhibition on some level.
I think we need to just not mismatch. Like, I guess I think even that in a way is almost too specific, right? Like, I think the clear big picture problem of him not bringing over enough voters, there's all these different variables. I will push back. We don't have to get into it now, but I think we have to always remember that the African-American voter electorate is very diverse, definitely does not have a unitary interest or ideology like any other group. But I think the big thing he needed to do to flip people in his column that weren't in his column was to basically much more early and much more aggressively figure out a way to rework the electability argument in his favor. Now, could he have been a little bit softer on Medicare for all, and would that have helped? Maybe in certain contexts. But I think, honestly, it was actually getting into that whole road and that whole distraction from Warren, which at the end of the day is like a fifth place finisher. She's not a – but just even those arguments in general.
But don't you think that when Biden said, Buttigieg and Biden said 170 million,
yes.
Listen, 170 million people are going to lose their private health insurance, that inhibited the electability argument?
Well, I think that, we don't know that because he
that.
hadn't been making. Sorry.
I said, well, Bernie should have had an answer for that. I mean, part
Bernie,
of this goes back to communication.
He should have had an answer, but also
who's prepping you?
He would have made. He had to have gone after Biden from